The greatest TV show that was airing in my opinion is finally airing no more. Better Call Saul is a show I've wanted to make a YouTube video about for quite a while now, but I haven't for a few reasons. One reason is that I've seen so many other deep, thought-provoking, and well-written content about it already. Seriously, a 30-second teaser trailer for this show is enough to spark a 30-minute video analysis from multiple people in the Better Call Saul community. Another reason I haven't made a video about it is because there's so much to take in and appreciate about Better Call Saul that there's no way I could do the entire show justice unless I really committed to making a super long video about it. Maybe someday I'll look over the show in more detail, but for now, I want to focus my larger products on less discussed topics, so I'll leave the heavy lifting for this show to the hundreds of other YouTubers making amazing videos about it. Nevertheless, now that Better Call Saul has come to its conclusion, I do feel like I owe it to myself to at least make a video breaking down my general thoughts. Much like other shows I've covered, such as Slings and Arrows and Moral Orel, I truly do feel Better Call Saul ranks up with the greatest television shows I've ever seen. It's masterfully written, acted, shot, edited, scored, directed. It fires on every single cylinder you can think of. I know many people found the first few seasons kind of slow, but for me personally I was hooked from the very beginning. I love the character drama, the performances, the cinematography, and even the little references to future events here and there were enough to keep me enthralled. I'm going to avoid spoilers as much as possible here for both Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad, even though anyone who's watching this video has probably seen them both at some point. Speaking of which, did you know that Better Call Saul is actually a spin-off of a show called Breaking Bad? Shocker, right? Sarcasm aside, there's been a lot of debate over whether or not Better Call Saul is better than Breaking Bad. Overall, I do slightly prefer Better Call Saul personally, but I don't find the question of which show is better to be that important. They're of the same quality. Watching Better Call Saul made me appreciate Breaking Bad more, not less, and vice versa. Together, I feel the shows tell one complete story, while still leaving enough for intrigue and mystery for the audience to not feel like everything has been spelled out to them. I was a little late to the party watching Breaking Bad. By the time I had finished it, Better Call Saul was in the middle of airing its second season. I loved Breaking Bad, so I immediately started watching season 1 of Better Call Saul when I was finished of that series. I caught up with the show around the time it had reached the second season finale. Right away, while I could tell the show had somewhat of a different tone from Breaking Bad, at least in the first few seasons, all the elements that made that show great carried over into the spin-off series. Better Call Saul had a tall order to fill from its conception. Oftentimes, hearing the words spin-off and prequel are enough to make me cautious, and this show is both at the same time. Not only that, but it's coming off the heels of one of the most highly acclaimed television shows of all time, and a show that wrapped up all of its character arcs and stories pretty perfectly. Thankfully, I didn't give myself the time to be skeptical because I watched Better Call Saul literally the day after I finished Breaking Bad, but I wouldn't blame others for being wary of the concept. I feel like the Slip and Jimmy animated series is a great example of what Better Call Saul could have been if left in the wrong hands. And for those curious enough to search that up, be my guest because I'm sure as hell not watching it. Better Call Saul, much like Breaking Bad, is a show which examines how a character changes over time and becomes darker and more morally corrupt. Breaking Bad often did these changes through life and death circumstances and showed that how power, greed, ego, and vengeance ultimately corrupted a middle-class man and turned him into a drug lord. Better Call Saul takes a much slower and methodical approach, at least until everything starts to go downhill in the later seasons. I kind of feel like Better Call Saul is what Breaking Bad would have been if the first half of the show didn't focus on Walter cooking meth, and instead showed us the slow decline of his moral fiber brought on from the dissatisfaction of his mundane life. Jimmy doesn't practice law under the name Saul Goodman until much later in the series. Imagine if Walt didn't start using the Heisenberg persona until about halfway through Breaking Bad. Again, not saying either one of these approaches is necessarily better than the other, but they're both very fascinating ways to tell the stories of these characters. Instead of constantly being held at gunpoint like Walt, Jimmy is often held back by his insecurities and missteps in handling situations. With that said, as the show progresses, Jimmy is held at gunpoint much more often. Mike sums it up pretty great in a speech he gives to Jimmy near the end of Season 5. This show is about the choices that the characters make, as seemingly small and insignificant as they may be, putting them on a road. Since the audience has seen Breaking Bad, at least the overwhelming majority of them have, we all know where the bad choice road is eventually going to lead them. Better Call Saul to me isn't so much about what happens, as much as it is how it happens, which I feel is the right approach for a prequel to take. I wish I could compare it to something, but I honestly can't even think of a prequel TV show, movie, video game, book, or anything I've experienced that does it quite as well as Better Call Saul. Let's get into the characters themselves. It's kind of weird to think how Breaking Bad is one of the greatest television shows in existence, and a lot of the best characters from its universe don't even appear in that show. Characters like Chuck McGill and Lalo Salamanca rank up there with some of the most fascinating foils to the leads in either series, and yes, that even includes Gus Fring. Even characters I thought were kind of shallow at first, like Nacho Varga and Howard Hamlin, became two of my favorite characters by the end of the series. Plus, Better Call Saul is the best developed female character in the entire Breaking Bad universe, that being Kim Wexler. I'd say in my opinion, but I don't even know who would debate me on that. Fight me, Marie fans. On top of all the new characters that it introduces, Better Call Saul gives a lot more added background and context for the characters carried over from Breaking Bad. Saul himself almost feels like an entirely new character, since we didn't really know Jimmy McGill in Breaking Bad. While I think referring to Saul as the comedic relief in Breaking Bad is oversimplifying his character a bit, Better Call Saul makes his story a lot more tragic now that we've seen everything he's lost. Some people have criticized Mike's half for Better Call Saul being irrelevant to Jimmy's story in seasons 2 through 4, which is a legitimate criticism. Mike has already lost a lot of his humanity by the time the series begins, so his journey throughout the show feels a lot more clinical compared to Jimmy's. I feel the strength in Mike's side of the story comes from how it fully realizes the world of the drug cartel as it continues. Near the end of the show where we see the worlds of Mike and Jimmy collide, it leaves greater impact, as you fully realize how Jimmy had no idea what he was getting himself into. While the show is called Better Call Saul, Mike's half of it feels much more like a prequel to Breaking Bad due to its darker tone, which I think works in the show's favor. I said a little earlier that this show adds more context without spelling everything out to the audience, and here's what I mean by that. The characters in both shows feel very real and human in that they don't always reveal their true feelings to the audience or other characters, and even if they do, there's a good chance that they're lying to themselves. Better Call Saul, even more so than his predecessor, encourages the audience to pick up on subtle intricacies in the characters' movements and facial expressions. That's not to say there isn't a lot of great dialogue, because believe me there is, and it's elevated by the fact that it's only used when necessary. The show assumes that the audience is intelligent and has a great attention to detail, and I respect AMC as a network for not forcing the writers to spell everything out. They trust Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould as much as we do, which is amazing to see from any network. I also really want to praise the technical achievements of Better Call Saul. This show not only looks better visually than most other television shows, but also most movies you'd see in theaters. Unlike a certain other AMC show, the visuals in Better Call Saul enhances the meat of the story rather than feeling like style over substance. The style is part of the substance, not a replacement for it. Everything feels purposeful, from the camera movements to the editing to even the colors of the clothes that the characters are wearing. I know there's a meme going around in the Better Call Saul community where people like to point out every little small detail and try to connect it with something irrelevant. As funny as that is, I really like how the show encourages that sort of deep thinking from its audience. Even if you don't want to look at it that closely, Better Call Saul still works as a compelling, straightforward drama, so it doesn't alienate the audience the way that something like a David Lynch or an Alejandro Jodorowsky movie might. Anyway, I really could talk about this show quite extensively, but given that I have other large projects I'm working on, that would probably send me on a bad choice road of my own. For now, I will concede that Better Call Saul is one of the greatest pieces of art I've ever experienced. Now that the show is over, I think it's going to be a long time until I see a new show that's airing that will leave the same impact on me that this show has. Granted, that's partially because I tend to gravitate towards shows which have already finished their run, but I digress. One thing I can say for sure is Better Call Saul is an absolute masterpiece. If Breaking Bad rose the bar on what a television show could accomplish, then Better Call Saul raises the bar on what a prequel show can accomplish, with the right amount of care, detail, and talent behind the wheel. If you haven't watched this or Breaking Bad for some reason, I highly implore you to do so. See, not every show I like is some indie production that no one has ever heard of. Special thanks to Hilly and Brand for supporting this channel on Patreon. If you'd like to support me as well, follow me in the links in the video description. Also be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share for more, and I'll see you all in another video.